Recording.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to First Cut. This is our review of The Last Dance. We're talking about episodes 5 and 6 from last night or the night before, depending when you're hearing this. Either way, guys, we're excited because we're talking about the Chicago Bulls MJ documentary. And I'm so excited because right away, episode 5, RB3, starts with that incredible All-Star game. I believe it was 1998. Kobe was 19 years old. They start off with him, and we have Michael Jordan talking about Kobe Bryant in the locker room, just to his friends, literally saying, and I quote right here, that little Laker boy is going to take everybody one-on-one. Mm-hmm. And then he says he doesn't wait for the game. He just takes the game, and he's bringing it back to one-on-one. And it's such an incredible moment because it's a private moment of Michael talking to his peers, his friends, some of the best players in the league, about the new one, the new kid, the come up of Kobe Bryant, and talking about how this kid is so cocky, but he kind of respects it. It's just a really fascinating, really cool moment. And I want to get your thoughts on that, man. I know you're a big Kobe guy.
Yeah, no, that was one of those moments that I really loved, and it was really, I mean, it was tough to watch. I mean, honestly, I probably sat there for the first, beginning intro because they really spent the first few minutes of episode 5 with Kobe, talking about him and Michael's relationship. And I'm sure there's going to be more to come down the line. I'm sure there's going to be more, facts and stories that they're going to be incorporated later. But it was kind of, it was sad seeing, how much of a legacy Kobe was leaving even when he was just a rookie, and like what he was going to grow to become and how much of a legend people are going to respect him to be. And then, it reminds you of how passionately Michael Jordan spoke at Kobe's funeral, a couple months ago, and how, a lot of people didn't know that Kobe and Mike had that kind of relationship. I kind of, when I was growing up and it just, and in life in general, I was always a big Kobe fan, always, loved Kobe, respected like his mentality, kind of took a lot of influence of that into my own life. So watching this documentary series so far and kind of seeing the parallels that Michael Jordan's always had, and then, knowing who Kobe is, as a figure that's always been in my life, is interesting to see those parallels. So seeing those two interact and have that dynamic is just like, mind blowing.
Not just that, but the fact that Kobe openly admits, and he said it for years, so it's not like it's breaking news, that he really did emulate Michael. He wanted to be like Mike. Like, he grew up watching Michael Jordan, and it's no, like, oh, it's just coincidence that he looks and acts like Michael Jordan. It's a real thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's probably one of the biggest aspects that you kind of take away from it, is just how impressive, he was able to emulate Michael Jordan's game. Like, even from the jump shot that I've always noticed. I mean, that's what everybody always talks about, right? Like how much the Kobe shot is just like the Jordan shot, how much Kobe's game is just like Jordan's game. The fadeaway, yeah.
The drive to the rim.
Yeah, exactly. The way he's able to spin around guys, all that kind of stuff is, you could see that Kobe was a big fan of Jordan and like studied the game from Michael Jordan. So I really appreciate just, seeing that kind of camaraderie just all the way from the beginning of the first episode. It was a really good way to kick off the series for the week. I feel like really emotional way to kick off the series for us Laker fans.
I texted you when that happened, and I freaked out because I thought it was so cool, because it really does kind of validate this weird Mamba mentality that lives in both of these players, Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. And obviously they have that Phil Jackson connection we talked about last week. But the idea that both of these guys have that killer instinct and that win first mentality. And my favorite part of that moment was obviously the game itself and how they were trying to one up each other. Mm-hmm. But my favorite is still Kobe saying, "I got Mike" on defense, and just yelling to the guys that he wants to guard Michael Jordan. What did you think of that? Because to me, that was like, that's peak Kobe. Just a 19-year-old Kobe being like, "Oh, I want to guard Michael Jordan."
Right.
That's incredible.
Well, I heard this story before. It wasn't in this documentary, but I heard it probably from some other Kobe Bryant interview where he was talking about the first time he met Michael Jordan. And I guess Michael Jordan might have told this story too, of like the first time. I think Phil Jackson might have said the story actually in the documentary, when the first time that Kobe and Michael Jordan met, that the second they met, Kobe being this huge fan of him, not even acknowledging any of that, he just says, "Hey man, I could really kick your butt in the court." And that's just, that kind of like super competitive, super demanding kind of spirit and talent is really what drives these players to like the top of their game. I mean, they really are the most competitive people in the entire world. And then, that's what I love about episode 5 and episode 6, because it gets into how the competitiveness kind of comes in a different way. So it's just really, really funny stuff all around.
It reminds me of the moment, and obviously we'll talk about the Dream Team a little bit later, but that moment during, I believe it's the 2012 team, when Kyrie Irving challenged Kobe Bryant to a one-on-one game. I don't know if you remember that. It's all over YouTube. But it kind of takes you back to that idea of like, I want to beat the legend. I want to beat the old guy because I'm the new kid on the come up who thinks that I'm better. And I always find that's one of the fun aspects of basketball. But later on, we get to the shoe, which is a big deal because this whole Nike Air Jordan connection of Mike Jordan and his legacy, not only on basketball, but on culture, on the culture itself, between movies, commercials, advertisements, hip hop music. I mean, the fact that I Ruled the World was playing in the beginning of the segment, and all the other throwback songs that you probably don't remember, RB3, but I remember. But it really is a connection that this shoe kind of changed the world. And I know that sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I'm really not. There's an entire documentary on Hulu about it. I don't know if you've seen it, RB3, about the Air Jordan, and it's incredible. But obviously you know more about this than I do because you're a big shoe guy. Air Jordan, man, talk to me about that.
Well, yeah, I've been wearing Jordans, since I don't know how long I can remember. Yeah, I mean, just the impact that they've had on, like they mentioned a lot of the impact in the documentary, how it had an impact on the culture. They're using commercials with Spike Lee, and we talked about that in that Spike Lee episode of the Meaning of Podcast, how he did those commercials playing his character Mars Blackman from She Gotta Have It, and then he's always been a big chance. So with that kind of allegiance, like the thing that early on that gave the Jordan brand is kind of brand, this kind of liveliness, is because of how much of a startup company that Nike was at the time. And they talked about that too, like how it was kind of like an underdog story all around. It was an underdog story for Nike. It was an underdog story for Mike, who was just entering as a rookie in the NBA. And it was also, and that's why, a figure like Spike Lee tying themselves to that, he's like always been like the cultural underdog, like from day one. So there's always been an allegiance to the Nike brand, and particularly the Jordan brand, to the Black community, that has been great in a lot of respects. And other people have criticized Michael Jordan and the Jordan brand for kind of the destruction it's had towards the community in some sense, like the idea of selling overpriced shoes for this kind of value that are really made so cheap, and there's like an overwhelming amount of profit behind it. But at the same time, it's like, and meanwhile too, in the streets of Chicago, where it's like very, very violent, where, Michael Jordan played at for many years. He like, like the lines for the shoes, like the whole robbery, the whole crime aspect that kind of has been underlying in the sneaker community, that has also been accredited to the origins of the Jordan shoes, Michael Jordan shoes too. So it all just comes around to, what's your perspective on it? Where do you fall? The episode 5 kind of addresses too how apolitical Michael Jordan chooses to be, and whether that's for the betterment of the community or for the worse, that's up to him. But it seems like his main motivation has just always been to make money. But yeah, it's funny because my professor Todd Boyd, who I took at USC, who he's featured prominently in the documentary. He's the guy with the cool glasses, and he has the nice like pool in the background. I don't know if that's actually his house. It probably is though. But he I mean, the way they kind of put what he was saying next to what Michael was saying, like like the whole.
Oh, I know exactly who you're talking about. Yeah. It took me a minute.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he took teaches at USC. He taught like some of my favorite classes.
That's cool, man.
But like the point that he was making the wealth over the politics, like the wealth over morality. And where does Michael Jordan stand on that? And that's where I can kind of see the documentary when you're talking about it last week, how they're going to start evaluating the more negative aspects of Michael Jordan. This is where you kind of see that those questions starting to pop up. And then I'm sure we're going to see more of that pop up later.
Yeah, I mean, I have that in my notes right now, but since you bring it up, let's just go there right now. Obviously, I want to keep going back to the shoe, but that line, the line that kind of is the most infamous Michael Jordan line of all time, and the fact that he fessed up to it is kind of funny, but he really did admit that he did say it. It's that Republicans buy sneakers too, especially during that. I believe it's a governor run between, I forget their names, but it's a
Senate run with Harvey Gantt
in North Carolina.
Yeah, Harvey Gantt, and I don't remember the Republican's name, but the Republican ended up winning.
Yeah, and it felt like, hey man, this is a great opportunity for you to just be like, hey, racism is bad. Like you're not necessarily making a big statement by saying racism is bad, by endorsing this guy, because the other guy is like hyper racist. So it's kind of an easy win, and he just didn't want to do it. And the fact that he said that line is kind of a big glimpse into what Michael Jordan was at that time. And especially looking that back now in 2020, where that's become literally almost the slogan of Nike with Colin Kaepernick, and them doing that ad that came out last year with Colin Kaepernick speaking out. And I believe it was the Fox News reporter who told LeBron James to shut up and dribble. But it's that idea that athletes aren't supposed to do anything political, even though they are clearly in a political environment, simply being who they are. And the fact that Michael Jordan never wanted to speak up. I personally feel, and obviously this might be my 2020 bias speaking, that might be to his detriment of his legacy. I don't know if you agree with that, but I feel like that does take away a little bit. And he explains it. He's like, I'm an athlete. I wanted to make money and focus on basketball. I'm selfish. And he even said, like, is that selfish? Yeah, but I don't care because I'm just worried about me and myself and making money. And I was like, okay, that sounds like Michael Jordan, but it does sound a little bit selfish.
Yeah, no, I mean, and they had mentioned that in the documentary, how it is kind of tarnished his legacy a little bit too. But, it also speaks to how he uses, frankly, politics and patriotism and exploits it to a certain extent for his own competitive game when it came to the Olympics, right? And how they go into that really kind of funny story of how he refused to wear the Reebok brand on the clothes, so he covered it up with the American flag. So a dude who doesn't care about politics, a dude who doesn't, who kind of shrugs his shoulder at racism and is indifferent towards helping elect North Carolina's first black senator, is seemingly far more interested in using the American flag and using his identity as an American, not to vote or not to speak out and endorse, but to aid his corporate partners. So, again, the documentary really goes to show a lot of things about Michael Jordan. And, that's not a point that the filmmakers made, but I mean, that's one of the things that stood out to me immediately was the whole election thing on top of the flag thing is that he's more interested in the corporatism than he is the actual helping of people.
Yeah, but here's my question to you, RB3, because I feel like episode 6 also kind of interlaces that with the idea of branding, right? And the whole gambling addiction and the whole role model thing and the responsibility he has to the public. Do you, I mean, there's an argument to be made that's kind of a negative in a fictitious way of viewing an athlete, because who says they're supposed to be a role model? Who says they're supposed to endorse anyone? They can do whatever they want. And if Michael doesn't want to do that, and he doesn't want to be a role model, and he doesn't care about the kids, as the commercials say he does, that's his prerogative. That's up to him. Do you think that's a fair argument?
Yeah, I mean, it's fair. Unfortunately, I think when we talk about role models, people who are role models may have not signed up to be role models, but they're assigned that. Like, that's just how society is going to look up to you, especially if you're black and you're successful in the United States. And that's what, President Barack Obama has spoke on during his segment of the documentary of, you want a Michael Jordan, you want an Oprah Winfrey, or you want a Barack Obama. this like perfect figure that is supposed to represent so much good, people don't want to hear about the flaws. People don't want to hear about the downsides. And unfortunately, that's just like the reality of the situation. It's not really, it's sad on some levels, but I think it's good to hold famous people and hold celebrities accountable too.
So you think that even though he's an athlete and he didn't necessarily ask for the spotlight, you still think they should be held accountable?
Yeah, I think if you're in any kind of entertainment arena or any sort of lane that is going to give you public exposure, it doesn't have to be entertainment particularly. If you're in any sort of lane that represents a public figure, you have to be outspoken about things. Unfortunately, like especially maybe in 1990 in the 90s it wasn't that much of a big deal, but I think in today's era, especially, people are curious about where you stand. People want to know who you support because, frankly, this goes to a larger point about America in general, but we have, entire news networks like Fox Business or CNBC that are completely focused talking towards a millionaire audience. And you see all the CEOs of all these different companies allowed to say, frankly, whatever they want. And they're always going to represent a more higher elitist kind of perspective than anybody else would. So if they're happy and open to rep their side and preach their message, no matter how detrimental it is to the American worker, then I think entertainment and entertainers, should have that responsibility too, to kind of inform the people where they're at and let people know if they should be supporting them or not, making that choice.
Yeah, and this also brings up a question that I'm going to give credit to. I listened to several NBA podcasts, but I listened to Ringer NBA podcast, and they did an after show of The Last Dance of episodes 5 and 6. And one of the hosts brought up the idea of the fiasco that happened earlier this year. And it's funny because to think that I'm still thinking about finishing out this year. This year might have been the craziest basketball year in the history of basketball. I really think that I kind of want to make a documentary about it, but that's like a whole different thing because that China thing was like the biggest deal. But a lot of the argument was made that it's kind of unfair to ask these players about a very weird, complex international issue that they weren't really aware of. And these reporters are like, well, what do you think about the protest in Hong Kong where blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And these guys are like, I don't know, I just play basketball. And that's kind of the answer MJ had back in the day in the early 90s. And now these players in 2020, several of the players were just like, beats me. I just want to play basketball and make money. I don't know what you think of that.
Well, the China situation is I almost think of it as a different situation only because there are so many different like sides and conflicts to it. Really, and really there isn't a lot of argument to be had. There is kind of one right side, and it's the side of the protesters. It's the side of the people of China. But, I understand with all the business ties and everything, it's tough for NBA players to speak on that. For what really resonates with the Jordan situation, and particularly with, that election cycle, is that was his hometown. That was his hometown, his home state. And it's America. I mean, we live in America. We have to deal with the consequences of racism every single day. And the fact that you're not willing to stand up and make a point about it speaks a lot to your character. And I think, when people question if it does or doesn't hurt his legacy, it frankly, it does. I mean, even though, like I said before, Obama even said to him, that kind of made him look at, that kind of made him look at Michael Jordan in a different way after that. Unfortunately, I hate that we have to put entertainers in that spotlight and we have to force them to answer these questions. But like I said, I think if you're a public figure, you should have some responsibility of knowing the consequences of what you're going to say. Same thing I will say to Kanye West. Same thing I will say to anybody else. I think you have to be accountable for the things you say in public because your influence means a lot to people.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because a lot of that has to deal with the success, like you said, of an African-American athlete. The idea that they are now put in a position of representing them and being someone who almost needs to speak up, regardless of what they feel or what they think or their education level or anything. They almost have to speak up. And a lot of people kind of make an argument. A lot of sports writers that I've been reading say that it's kind of unfair to them that they're put in a position because they're an athlete that they happen to be good in a certain sport, and now they have to be a social activist or at least speak up a little bit for a social activist movement. And that puts them in a position that they didn't necessarily want to be in, versus the idea of taking a white athlete and not holding them accountable for, I don't know, issues that, white communities have been doing to the African-American communities. And we don't question them for doing that.
Right.
We don't hold them accountable for the same issues that we hold African-American athletes.
Yeah, but you know what? And that really reminded me of another thing that stood out to me. Again, shout out to Professor Todd Boyd. He made this point, and in one of his classes he made called Race, Class, and Gender. And we talked about the film Do the Right Thing. And they showed the clip in Do the Right Thing where the guy is wearing the Larry Bird jersey, and he, puts his feet over and he puts his bike over the Jordan shoes, and the homie gets mad. And, the scene itself is very funny, but when it's hysterical. But when you look at the deeper context of it, it's essentially an argument about why is a white man in the black community? Why are you what's the meaning of gentrification? What's the meaning of cultural appropriation? Professor Todd Boyd made the point of, that is seen as a fight between the older generation of the NBA that was more white focused, Euro focused, and what the NBA has eventually evolved into, and being really probably one of the most pro black athletic organizations in the world. So it's just really, really crazy that, Spike Lee was more willing to speak on behalf of Jordan and what he represents in this community than Jordan himself would be.
It's a fascinating, complex, detailed subject matter, because it really talks about the origin story of basketball itself, right? And how white it is. It's so freaking white. It's not even funny. Not just that, the idea that if you go to a Pacers game, for example, or if you go to especially even last year, a Utah Jazz game, and just see the perception of these fans. I believe there's a documentary about it. I forget which one it was I saw last year, talking about the idea of, I'm a white fan, entertain me, tall black person kind of mentality that these white people had almost since the origin story of basketball, when they finally brought black people in. And we had that issue last year with Russell Westbrook and the Utah Jazz, because those Jazz fans are kind of notorious for being just a little bit racist. No offense to any Jazz fans out there, but I've seen the shots in the crowds and they're like 99% white. And it's kind of crazy, if I'm really being honest. And it's that idea of what is the mentality that you're such a fan of these people, yet when they choose to speak up, you want to beat the crap out of them. And it really is kind of a mind-blowing ideology that you worship someone like Donovan Mitchell, but if he chooses to say something, you go crazy. And you lose your mind as if they're saying something so controversial. That's like a whole different episode. And I don't want to get into that, but it really is an interesting issue and something I've talked about a little bit. I want to finish up by saying we can briefly talk about the Dream Team, because there's not really there. I mean, they introduced, I like what Mike Wilbon said, that he said they introduced basketball to the rest of the world. And it's so true, right? Because after that, we have the famous 2008, I believe it's 2008 basketball game where the U.S. got third, I believe. And it's kind of based off the 1992 Dream Team, where those kids grew up and played basketball after seeing Michael Jordan destroy them in Barcelona. And then all of a sudden, those kids in Barcelona won the gold medal. And it's kind of funny, but it's true. The fact that their impact on the game itself and allowing these NBA players to create the most monster team in the history of teams, let's face it, that team is just like, it's not fair to any other player. Brought the international aspect to basketball, and now it's a really big international sport. And now the best player in the league, so-and-so, the best player in the league is the Greek Freak, right? Yeah. Giannis. And that's the idea of the international play aspect. What do you think of that angle?
No, that was great. I loved hearing the stories about the Olympics. And it's so funny because there are two great things that came out of that. One was the practice that they talked about where Magic Johnson got mad and threw the basketball over.
I wish I could be there, man. I wish I could be. You imagine seeing like Larry Bird versus Michael Jordan, and like I'm not even from that era, but even I would just be freaking out.
Yeah, no, that's literally like 2K right there. It's like playing
Exactly.
an all-star game of 2K or something like that. So seeing that story was hilarious, and then more importantly, seeing Tony Kanush, I think that was his name.
Yeah.
That whole thing,
I felt bad for him. Yeah.
it was hilarious because I went because last night I watched episode 5 and I watched episode 6 and then I watched episode 5 again with my mom's. And when we watched episode 5 the first time, the first scene literally opens with Jordan kind of messing with Tony Kanush a little bit, like literally the first scene.
Right.
And then
Right.
The first scene after the Kobe segment, and then you go to that story later on in the episode about how they were just ripping into him on the Olympic stage. It's absolutely hilarious.
Am I the only one who's starting to feel a little bit bad for Jerry Krause?
Yeah.
Like, it's getting a bit much. When Scotty's like, we had to destroy Jerry at all costs. We had to kill his boy. And I was like, kill his boy? Oh my God.
Yeah.
What did Jerry do to you? But to be fair, like when Jerry was like, we just won the championship, I feel like crying because we have the best organization. These guys didn't do much.
Yeah.
It was the organization. I was like, dude, really?
Yeah. I mean, that
was a bit much.
Yeah, I mean he was a slime ball, and yeah, it's just funny seeing how much of their, because even in episode 6 there was a moment where they also said they're doing it just to rib at Jerry as well.
Yeah, they did. Last thing I want to say is obviously we have to talk about the elefante in the room. As I'm wearing this hat, episode 6 ends with the last chance the Suns have ever had at a finals. We tried. We had Barkley. We did our best. Triple overtime. The game was crazy. We won in Chicago, which was fun. But that's about all I have to say about that because I don't want to get into it. It's a forgotten Suns team, but I remember. And oh well, we tried.
Yeah. It's really funny because that whole thing with leading up into, for one, I had previously watched a YouTube series that was about like the most iconic missed shots of all time. I watched it like earlier this year, and one of the shots they brought up was the New York Knicks versus the Chicago Bulls series that they mentioned here, the '93 playoff series, and how Charles Smith had went up to take that last shot that they could have had at the end of the game, and he got blocked. I believe it was by Michael Jordan. I
think it was Pippen and Jordan. I think both of them.
Yeah. And how if they would have hit that last shot, we wouldn't have seen the three-peat. The Bulls probably would have been dismantled at that exact moment. And they wouldn't have, and probably the New York Knicks would have had their first ever championship, which is crazy to think that basketball origin places in New York, but they never won a championship. That was the closest they ever came. But yeah, seeing the Suns, seeing the Knicks lose and seeing Patrick Ewing, get frustrated and all that was a great time too. But seeing that Suns series was also like really fun too. Again, I didn't know the Suns had made it that far personally, so good for them.
Yeah, man, we tried our best, man. Obviously, as the biggest Suns fan there is, I have to bring that up. Last thing I want to say, since you brought it up, one thing that I noticed too about that Tony Kanush segment was when he was like, I've never seen defense like that in my life. And they cut to Scottie Pippen like in his face and his hands like basically grabbing him. And I was like, oh my God, imagine being by Scottie Pippen. He's going all out. Like, that is the scariest thing ever, dude. Like, Pippen was like the third or fourth best player on the Dream Team. And I know I'm kind of exaggerating, but in a way I'm not. Like, Pippen was good, man. Like, I know I keep bringing that up, but his defense is like crazy. Like, I've never seen a guy that lanky play that close, so he's able to like shift his body so easily. It's incredible. Yeah, but either way, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say like more on that moment. Tony was like, I didn't expect him to be in my face the whole time, and that just had me rolling.
Yeah, me too. Because then they cut to Pippen, like literally, like right like in his face, grabbing him. And I was like, oh my God, I feel bad for this guy.
Yeah.
By the way, guys, that is our review of episodes 5 and 6 of The Last Dance. Make sure you guys tune in next week. We might have a special guest next week, and we might be posting this sooner, so make sure you tune in. Let us know in the comments down below what is your favorite moment or your favorite quote. Either way, guys, for the First Cut crew, I'm Andres.
There's RB3.
And we're peacing out. Peace out, guys.
Dope.
What do you think?